The conference hall on Viridian Prime was filled with representatives from across the galaxy. Humans had been sitting at this table for 6 long months, trying to find common ground with species that had ruled the stars for thousands of years. Admiral Jake Morrison watched the proceedings with growing frustration. He had served in the human fleet for 20 years, and had seen many things, but never such open contempt as what the elder species showed toward his people. Ambassador Claire Bennett sat at the head of the human delegation. She was a patient woman who had spent her entire career building bridges between different cultures. But even her legendary composure was beginning to crack under the weight of constant insults. The Velkari ambassador was speaking again with that same tone of superiority that had marked every session. His scaled face twisted into what might have been a smile as he dismissed the latest human proposal with a wave of his clawed hand. The Velkari were an old species with technology that humanity could barely understand. They had been traveling between stars when humans were still living in caves. The same was true for the Thros and the Zorvathians. These 3 species dominated the Galactic Council and made sure everyone knew it. They treated younger species like children who needed constant guidance and correction. Claire had tried everything. She had been respectful and diplomatic. She had made compromises and accepted limitations. She had endured lectures about how humanity was too young and too violent to be trusted with real power. But the proposal now on the table was too much even for her patience. The Council wanted humanity to accept permanent junior status in galactic affairs. Humans would need permission before colonizing new worlds. Human military development would be monitored and restricted. Human trade would be regulated by council committees. In exchange, humanity would receive protection and guidance from their betters. It was slavery dressed up in diplomatic language, and everyone in the room knew it. The Thros representative made a sound like breaking glass as he added his support to the proposal. He reminded the humans that respect took millennia to earn and could not be demanded after mere decades of space travel. The Zorvathian high priest nodded in agreement with his ancient eyes fixed on Claire as if daring her to object. Admiral Morrison saw Claire's hands tighten on her papers. He had worked with her long enough to recognize the signs. She was done. After 6 months of patience and diplomacy, she had finally reached her limit. Claire stood slowly, and the room fell silent. It was not her turn to speak, according to council protocol, but she stood anyway. The other human delegates followed her lead, rising from their seats in perfect unity. Claire gathered her documents with deliberate care. Her voice when she spoke was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the chamber. She told the council that humanity had come in good faith, offering cooperation and friendship. Humans had asked only for the respect that the elder species showed to each other. Nothing more and nothing less. But if the council could not offer that basic courtesy, then there was no point in continuing these talks. The Velkari ambassador seemed genuinely shocked. In 10,000 years of galactic politics, no species had ever walked away from the negotiating table. Species that refused council guidance found themselves isolated and struggling. Their economies suffered and their expansion stalled. Eventually, they always came back willing to accept whatever terms the council offered. The Velkari could not imagine that humanity would be any different, but Claire was already moving toward the exit. Admiral Morrison and the rest of the delegation followed without a word. The Velkari called after them, asking if wounded pride was really worth abandoning civilization. Claire stopped at the doorway and turned back. Her answer was simple and final. This was not about pride. This was about refusing to waste any more time on people who would never see humans as equals. Then she walked out and did not look back. The council chamber erupted in confused conversation. The Thros representatives argued that this was clearly a negotiating tactic. Humans were trying to gain leverage by pretending to leave. The Zorvathian high priest agreed, saying that humanity would return within weeks, begging for another chance. But there were a few voices expressing concern. What if the humans meant it? What if they really were prepared to go their own way without council support? Those voices were quickly shouted down. The Council had maintained galactic order for thousands of years. They had seen countless species try to assert independence, only to fail and return humbled. Humanity would be no different. Let them have their tantrum. Let them feel the sting of isolation. They would learn soon enough that the galaxy was too big and too dangerous for lone species to survive without protection. Admiral Morrison escorted Claire back to the human ship in orbit. Neither of them spoke during the journey. There was nothing that needed to be said. They had both known this moment was coming. The only question had been when Claire's patience would finally run out. Now that it had, there was no going back. Humanity was on its own. The news reached Earth within hours. The response from human governments was surprisingly unified. No one criticized Claire for walking out. No one suggested returning to beg for better terms. Instead, there was a grim determination that spread across human space like wildfire. If the galaxy would not accept humanity as equals, then humanity would prove they did not need acceptance. They would build their own future without council permission or guidance. Orders went out to every human colony and outpost. Industrial production was to be increased immediately. Research programs were to focus on military applications. Shipyards were to begin construction of new vessels. Diplomatic contact with alien species was to be reduced to essential trade only. Humanity was closing its doors and preparing for whatever came next. The Galactic Council watched these developments with amusement. They saw the burst of activity as the desperate thrashing of a species that had overestimated its own importance. The elder races had resources and technology that humanity could not match. Let the humans build their little ships and fortify their little colonies. When reality set in, they would realize their mistake and come crawling back. The Council was patient. They could wait for humanity to learn this lesson the hard way. But there were a few among the elder species who felt uneasy. They remembered other young races that had shown similar determination. Most had failed and been absorbed into the Council system, but a few had succeeded in carving out their own path. Those few had become powers in their own right. As the weeks passed and human activity continued to increase, those uneasy few began to wonder if maybe the Council had made a terrible mistake. 3 months passed without any word from humanity. The Galactic Council had expected the humans to make contact within weeks, offering to restart negotiations. Instead, there was only silence. Human colonies continued to function, and human ships still traveled through space, but there was no attempt at diplomatic communication. It was as if humanity had decided the rest of the galaxy simply did not matter anymore. The Zorvathian High Priest assured the Council that this was exactly what they should expect. Humans were a proud species and needed time to accept reality. Their silence was just stubbornness. Eventually, hunger and necessity would bring them back to the negotiating table. The other council members mostly agreed. After all, they had trade routes and technology and markets that humanity desperately needed. Without access to these resources, human expansion would grind to a halt. It was only a matter of time, but reports from the border regions suggested something different was happening. Captain Lisa Hayes commanded a research vessel called the Constellation. Her ship studied ancient ruins and archaeological sites across the galaxy. For years, she had worked alongside human researchers, sharing discoveries and comparing notes. The humans had always been eager to learn and quick to share their own findings. But when Lisa tried to contact her human colleague, Dr. Peter Cole, her messages went unanswered. She sent 3 more requests over the following weeks. All were ignored. Lisa reported this to her Velkari supervisors. They told her not to worry. The humans were being childish and would get over it soon enough. But Lisa was not so sure. She had known Peter for 5 years. He was not the type to ignore friends over political disputes. Something had changed, and it was not just hurt feelings. Other reports painted a similar picture. Human traders still conducted business, but only the minimum required by existing contracts. Cultural exchanges stopped completely. Human scientists withdrew from joint research projects. Human artists canceled performances on alien worlds. It was a systematic withdrawal from galactic society done quietly and without explanation. The humans were not being hostile. They were simply acting as if the rest of the galaxy had ceased to exist. More concerning were the intelligence reports that began filtering in. Human industrial output had increased by 40% in just 3 months. Mining operations expanded into new asteroid fields. Construction facilities that had been idle for years were now running at full capacity. Shipyards were working around the clock, building something. But what they were building remained unclear, because humanity had stopped sharing information about their activities. The Council's intelligence division was managed by a Thros analyst called Crystalline 7. She had spent centuries tracking the movements and developments of younger species. Her job was to identify potential threats before they became problems. The data on human activity troubled her. She compiled everything into a detailed report and presented it to the Council. Humans were fortifying the borders of their space with defense platforms and sensor networks. Military shipyards showed unprecedented activity. Research stations in remote systems were conducting classified experiments. The pattern suggested preparation for something big. General Zareth was the Velkari military commander responsible for maintaining galactic security. He had fought in hundreds of battles over his long career and had little patience for alarmist reports. When Crystalline 7 presented her findings, he dismissed them with barely a glance. "Let the humans build their toys," he said. The Velkari fleet had maintained peace for 5,000 years. Human technology was primitive by comparison. Whatever weapons they were developing could not possibly threaten civilizations with such vast experience and resources. But not everyone shared the general's confidence. There were analysts and observers who had studied humanity closely over the years. They remembered how quickly humans had developed space travel once they set their minds to it. They remembered human innovation and adaptability. These observers warned that underestimating humanity might be a mistake. Their warnings were largely ignored. As the 4th month of silence began, new details emerged. Human ships were being spotted in systems far from their usual territory. These were not trade vessels or exploration ships. They were fast courier craft that appeared briefly and then vanished. They seemed to be mapping routes and checking navigation points. When Council ships tried to intercept them, the human vessels simply jumped to faster-than-light travel and disappeared. Human colonies were also changing in visible ways. New orbital facilities appeared around major worlds. Surface installations that looked like military bases were constructed with impressive speed. Civilian populations were being organized into civil defense units. Children were being taught emergency procedures. It looked like humanity was preparing for war, but no one could figure out who they planned to fight. The Council held multiple sessions to discuss the situation. Some members argued for direct intervention. Send ships to human space and demand answers. Others counseled patience. Let the humans play soldier for a while. When they realized how expensive military buildup was, they would abandon it and return to normal. The debate went in circles with no clear resolution. Meanwhile, human silence continued. Ambassador Claire Bennett had not been seen or heard from since the walkout. Admiral Jake Morrison was reportedly commanding military exercises in human space, but refused all requests for comment. The few human diplomats still assigned to neutral stations would only say that humanity was pursuing its own interests and had nothing further to discuss with the Council. By the 5th month, even the most dismissive Council members were starting to feel uneasy. This was not how rejected species were supposed to behave. They were supposed to suffer and struggle and eventually come back humbled. Instead, humanity seemed to be thriving. Their economy was growing. Their territory was expanding. Their people showed no signs of discontent with isolation. If anything, humans seemed energized by their independence. Crystalline 7 updated her analysis. Based on current trends, she estimated that human industrial capacity would exceed several Council species within 2 years. Their military shipbuilding program was producing vessels at a rate that seemed impossible for such a young civilization. Where were they getting the resources? Where were they getting the expertise? The numbers did not make sense unless humanity had achieved breakthroughs that the Council knew nothing about. General Zareth still insisted there was no real threat. Old civilizations always had advantages that young species could not overcome. Experience mattered more than enthusiasm. Technology developed over millennia could not be matched by a few months of desperate building. The Velkari fleet alone could crush any force humanity might assemble. The general's confidence was reassuring to those who wanted to believe him, but as the 6th month approached, there were more voices expressing doubt. What if the general was wrong? What if humanity had found ways to leapfrog traditional development? What if their withdrawal from galactic society was not weakness, but strength? These questions hung in the air unanswered as the Council watched and waited to see what would happen next. The galaxy was about to find out just how badly they had miscalculated. The distress call came from a Zorvathian colony called New Providence. It was a small settlement on the edge of Council space, with barely 10,000 inhabitants. The colony had been peaceful and prosperous until the Krell arrived. The Krell were raiders from beyond the galactic rim who preyed on isolated settlements. They were brutal and efficient, taking slaves and resources before disappearing back into the darkness between stars. New Providence had defense systems, but they were old and had not been maintained properly. The colony governor had requested upgrades months ago, but the Council moved slowly on such matters. Now, 3 Krell warships were in orbit, systematically destroying the colony's defenses. The governor sent emergency signals to the nearest Council military base. The response was not encouraging. A relief fleet would arrive in 3 weeks. The colony had perhaps 3 days before the Krell overwhelmed their last shields and began landing troops. The governor was a pragmatic man who cared more about saving lives than about pride. He looked at the star charts and saw that the nearest human system was only 6 hours away. New Terra was a major human colony with significant population and industry. The governor knew that asking humans for help would be humiliating. His species had spent months telling humanity they were too primitive and violent to be trusted. But his people were about to die, and he would swallow any amount of pride to save them. The broadcast went out on all frequencies. This is New Providence, to any human vessels in range. We are under attack by Krell raiders. Our defenses are failing. Council relief is 3 weeks away. We request immediate assistance. The governor repeated the message 3 times and then waited. He half expected silence. Why would humans help a species that had treated them with such contempt? But 6 minutes later, a response came through on a military channel. The voice was calm and professional. This is Commodore Ryan Fletcher of the Human Defense Fleet. We have received your distress call. Relief is en route. Estimated arrival time is 5 hours and 40 minutes. Fletcher out. The transmission ended before the governor could respond. He stared at the communication console, hardly believing what he had heard. The humans were coming. They were actually coming to help. 5 hours and 37 minutes later, the human fleet arrived. The governor and his staff watched their sensors in amazement as 12 ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. But these were not the converted civilian vessels that humanity had used when they first reached the stars. These were purpose-built warships, sleek and deadly-looking. They moved with a grace that seemed impossible for vessels their size, taking up defensive positions around New Providence with practiced efficiency. The Krell detected the new arrivals and adjusted their formation. They had fought Council forces before and were confident in their ability to handle these unknown ships. The Krell commander sent a standard challenge demanding that the humans leave or be destroyed. Commodore Fletcher's response was brief. Negative. Withdraw immediately or be engaged. The Krell commander laughed at the arrogance. 12 ships against 3 Krell heavy cruisers. The outcome seemed obvious. The Krell moved to attack and learned very quickly that they had made a terrible mistake. Human point defense systems activated, creating walls of fire that shredded incoming missiles before they could reach their targets. Krell weapons that had torn through Council shields barely scratched the human vessels. And when the humans returned fire, The Krell discovered what real naval gunnery looked like. Human railguns fired projectiles at a significant fraction of light speed. The kinetic energy was devastating. The first Krell cruiser took 3 hits in rapid succession. Its shields collapsed, and its hull ruptured, venting atmosphere and crew into space. The ship broke apart in a series of secondary explosions. The engagement had lasted less than 4 minutes. The second Krell ship tried to close the distance, hoping to use its superior mass in a ramming attack. Human destroyers intercepted it with a precision that suggested extensive training. They fired in coordinated volleys targeting specific sections of the enemy hull. The Krell cruiser's engines exploded, and the ship went dead in space. The third Krell commander decided that discretion was the better part of valor and attempted to flee. Human ships pursued, cutting off escape routes with a tactical awareness that spoke of advanced coordination systems. The fleeing Krell ship managed to jump to faster-than-light travel, but not before taking severe damage. It would not be conducting any more raids for a long time. The governor watched the entire battle on his screens. It had lasted 17 minutes from first shot to last. 3 Krell warships had been neutralized, with an ease that seemed almost casual. Not a single human vessel showed significant damage. Commodore Fletcher contacted the colony. His face appeared on the view screen, showing a man in his 50s with gray hair and steady eyes. He informed the governor that the immediate threat had been eliminated. Human ships would maintain position around New Providence until Council forces arrived to provide permanent security. The governor tried to thank him, but Fletcher cut him off politely. No thanks were necessary. The Commodore made it clear this was simply the right thing to do. Then, the transmission ended. The human fleet remained in orbit for 2 days. They were professional and distant. When Zorvathian civilians tried to thank them or invite them down to the colony surface, the humans politely declined. They had a job to do and would see it through, but they were not interested in socializing. It was clear that humanity had not forgotten the insults and dismissals of the past months. They would help because it was right, but they would not pretend to be friends. General Zareth arrived with the Council relief fleet and found the situation already resolved. The general tried to assert authority, suggesting that human forces should have waited for Council permission before engaging the Krell. Fletcher's response was cold. New Providence had requested help. Humans had provided it. If the general had concerns, he could file them through proper diplomatic channels. Assuming humanity ever chose to reopen those channels, the human fleet departed as soon as the Council forces were in position. They jumped to faster-than-light travel without ceremony, leaving the Zorvathians and Velkari to contemplate what they had witnessed. General Zareth reviewed the battle recordings with growing unease. Human weapons technology was far more advanced than intelligence had suggested. Their tactical coordination was exceptional. Their crews were well-trained and disciplined. This was not a primitive force playing at military strength. This was a real fighting fleet. The news spread across the galaxy within days. Humanity had defeated a Krell raiding party with almost contemptuous ease. Species that had dismissed human military capability were forced to reconsider. The Thros analyzed the battle data and came to disturbing conclusions. Human ships showed evidence of technology that should have taken centuries to develop. Either humans had made incredible breakthroughs, or they had been hiding their true capabilities all along. The Galactic Council held an emergency session. Crystalline 7 presented updated intelligence estimates. Human military strength had been severely underestimated. The ships that had fought at New Providence represented only a fraction of total human capability. Shipyard activity suggested that dozens more vessels were under construction, and if humans had been building in secret for 6 months, there was no telling what else they might have hidden. The question that everyone was asking was simple, but terrifying. If this was what humanity could do with 12 ships, what could they do with their entire fleet? The Council had no answer. For the first time in thousands of years, the elder species realized they might have made a serious mistake. They had pushed away a species with real military potential. Whether humanity would use that potential remained to be seen. The Krell did not forgive humiliation. 3 weeks after their defeat at New Providence, the Raider clans held a gathering. Warriors from a dozen different clans met to discuss the insult they had suffered. Humans had destroyed their ships and embarrassed them in front of the entire galaxy. This could not stand. The Krell way was simple. When challenged, you responded with overwhelming force. You made examples of those who dared to resist. You taught lessons that would not be forgotten. The clan leaders agreed to assemble the largest war fleet they had ever created. Over 300 ships were gathered from raider bases across the Outer Rim. Heavy cruisers formed the core of the fleet, supported by destroyers and fighter carriers. It was a force capable of crushing entire civilizations. The target was obvious. Human space would burn. Human colonies would be destroyed or enslaved. The galaxy would learn that the Krell were not to be trifled with. The Galactic Council detected the fleet movement within hours. Their long-range sensors tracked the massive gathering of ships and calculated their likely trajectory. The destination was clear. The Krell were heading straight for human territory. Council analysts estimated arrival in 2 weeks. The question was, what, if anything, should be done about it? Some council members argued for intervention. Send a joint fleet to intercept the Krell before they reached human space. Others pointed out that humanity was not a council member and had no claim to council protection. Why should they risk their own ships to save a species that had walked away from negotiations? The debate was still ongoing when Ambassador Claire Bennett requested an emergency session. Claire appeared via holographic link, looking as calm as ever. She stood before the assembled council representatives with the same dignity she had shown during the failed peace talks. She informed them that the Krell invasion fleet had been detected and its course plotted. Humanity was notifying the council as a courtesy, as required by galactic law. But humans were not requesting assistance. They would handle the threat themselves. The Velkari ambassador seemed almost pleased by this news. Surely now, humanity would see the folly of independence. A fleet of over 300 Krell warships was approaching. Human forces numbered perhaps 30 or 40 ships at most. The mathematics were brutal and unavoidable. Humanity faced annihilation. Perhaps this tragedy would teach other young species to accept council protection when it was offered. Claire listened to the Velkari's speech without expression. When he finished, she simply stated that humanity would defend its territory with all necessary force. What happened in the coming days might change the balance of power in the galaxy. The council was being informed as a courtesy, so they would not be surprised by events. Then she ended the transmission before anyone could respond. The Zorvathian high priest spoke into the silence that followed. Humans were choosing to die with pride, rather than live with sense. It was tragic, but perhaps inevitable, given their aggressive nature. The council could only hope that the Krell would be satisfied with conquering human space and would not push deeper into the galaxy. Several members nodded in agreement. It was regrettable that humanity had to learn this lesson the hard way, but some species simply refused to listen to wisdom. But as council intelligence continued tracking both fleets, something unexpected became clear. Human ships were not fleeing. Civilian populations were not being evacuated. Instead, human military forces were concentrating at a system called Haven's Gate. This was the primary entry point into human space from the direction the Krell were approaching. It was the logical place for a defensive stand, but the numbers still made no sense. Crystalline 7 reviewed the data with increasing confusion. Human ships were arriving at Haven's Gate from across their territory. She counted them carefully, checking and rechecking her sensors. 50 ships, then 100, then 150. The numbers kept climbing. By the time the Krell fleet was 2 days out, the human force at Haven's Gate numbered 270 vessels. The council chamber erupted in shocked conversation when this information was shared. 270 ships. Where had they come from? Intelligence estimates had put total human military strength at maybe 40 vessels. Even accounting for rapid construction, that number should have been impossible. Either the humans had been building in secret for far longer than 6 months, or they had found ways to accelerate production beyond anything the council thought possible. General Zareth demanded verification. Crystalline 7 showed him the sensor readings. There was no doubt. 270 human warships were arranged in defensive formation at Haven's Gate. The formation itself was sophisticated, showing evidence of advanced tactical planning. This was not a desperate last stand thrown together in panic. This was a prepared defensive position, held by a real military force. The implications were staggering. Humanity had not been struggling during their 6 months of silence. They had been building an entire fleet. They had been training crews and developing tactics. They had been preparing for exactly this kind of confrontation. The Council had assumed human isolation would weaken them. Instead, it had freed them to focus entirely on military development. Every species with sensor capability turned their attention to Haven's Gate. The upcoming battle would reveal the truth about human military strength. If the Krell crushed them as expected, then humanity would be finished as an independent power. But if humans could hold their ground, or even win, then everything would change. The balance of power that had existed for thousands of years would shift. Admiral Jake Morrison commanded the human fleet from the bridge of the dreadnought USS Valiant. He had spent 6 months preparing for this moment. Every ship in his fleet had been built or refitted to his specifications. Every crew had trained relentlessly on the tactics he had developed. Every weapon system had been tested and optimized. The Krell were coming with overwhelming numbers, but Morrison was not intimidated. Numbers only mattered if you did not know how to use them properly. Commander Kelly Wright was Morrison's tactical officer. She sat at her station coordinating the movements of 270 ships with calm efficiency. The defensive formation had been planned down to the smallest detail. Every ship knew its position and role. Every captain understood the battle plan. When the Krell arrived, they would find humans ready and waiting. The Krell fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Haven's Gate system. Their commander saw the human defensive formation and laughed. 270 ships looked impressive, but the Krell had 300. And Krell warriors had been raiding and fighting for generations. These humans were amateurs, playing at war. The Krell commander ordered his fleet to attack in standard formation. Overwhelming force had always worked before. Admiral Morrison watched the Krell advance on his tactical display. The enemy was doing exactly what he had predicted. They were confident in their numbers and their experience. They thought this would be like every other battle they had fought. Morrison allowed himself a small smile. The Krell were about to learn that humanity did not fight like other species. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when you pushed humans too far. The order went out across the human fleet. All ships prepare for engagement. Weapons free on my command. 270 warships armed their weapons and locked onto targets. The Krell continued their advance, unaware that they were sailing into a carefully prepared trap. In minutes, the battle would begin, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Battle of Haven's Gate began with a thunderclap of human railgun fire. Admiral Morrison had given the order to engage at maximum range, something the Krell had not expected. Projectiles traveling at 30% of light speed crossed the distance between the fleets in seconds. The kinetic energy was tremendous. 3 Krell cruisers exploded before their commanders even realized they were under attack. The rest of the Krell fleet scrambled to respond, but the humans were already shifting tactics. Commander Kelly Wright coordinated the human battle groups with mechanical precision. She had divided the fleet into smaller squadrons that could operate independently while supporting each other. This was not the standard formation fighting that the Galactic Council used. This was something new. Human ships moved like predators hunting in packs. They would concentrate fire on a single target, destroying it quickly, and then shift to new prey before the enemy could respond. The Krell fought back with the fury they were known for. Their heavy cruisers had powerful weapons that could tear apart most ships. But human point defense systems proved to be extraordinary. Missiles that should have reached their targets were intercepted and destroyed. Energy weapons were deflected by shields that seemed far too strong for vessels of their size. The Krell were landing hits, but not as many as they expected, and the damage was less severe than it should have been. Human-directed energy weapons carved through Krell shields with disturbing efficiency. The weapons drew power from compact fusion reactors that represented a significant advancement over what Council intelligence had predicted. Krell armor that had withstood Council attacks for years melted under sustained human fire. Ship after ship went dark as human gunnery found critical systems and destroyed them with surgical precision. The battle raged for 2 hours, with neither side gaining a clear advantage. The Krell had numbers, but the humans had better technology and superior tactics. Admiral Morrison watched the flow of combat from his command chair. He was waiting for the right moment. The Krell commander was getting frustrated. Morrison could tell from the enemy formation. They were bunching up, trying to concentrate their firepower to break through the human line. It was exactly what he wanted them to do. A group of 30 human destroyers executed a maneuver that had been practiced hundreds of times in simulation. They accelerated to speeds that made them blur on sensors and struck the Krell left flank from an unexpected angle. The attack was so sudden and violent that 12 enemy ships were destroyed before the Krell could react. The enemy formation wavered as captains tried to respond to threats coming from multiple directions simultaneously. Commander Wright's voice remained calm as she directed the next phase. Battle Groups 4 and 7 were to execute a pincer movement on the Krell center. Battle Group 9 would exploit the gap created on the enemy flank. Every human captain knew their role and executed it perfectly. This was the result of 6 months of intensive training. Every crew member had drilled until these maneuvers were second nature. The Krell were experienced warriors, but they had never faced an enemy that fought like this. Human ships were faster and more maneuverable than they had any right to be. Human weapons hit harder than their size suggested possible. Human tactics were aggressive and unpredictable. The Krell commander tried to impose order on his fleet, but the humans would not allow it. Every time the Krell attempted to form up, the humans would strike from a new angle, disrupting their cohesion. 4 hours into the battle, the Krell had lost over 60 ships. Human losses stood at 12, destroyed, and 20 damaged. The mathematics were becoming unavoidable. At this rate, the Krell would be annihilated, while the human fleet remained largely intact. But the Krell commander was not ready to accept defeat. He ordered a desperate, all-or-nothing attack. Every remaining ship would concentrate on breaking through the human center. They would accept massive casualties for the chance to reach the colonies beyond and complete their mission. Over 100 Krell ships compressed into a tight formation and charged directly at the human defensive line. It was a brutal tactic that relied on overwhelming force to punch through any defense. Admiral Morrison watched them come and allowed himself a satisfied nod. The Krell had just made their final mistake. He opened a channel to a ship captain who had been waiting beyond the asteroid belt for this exact moment. Captain Lisa Martinez commanded a squadron of converted mining vessels and cargo haulers. These were not pretty ships, and they would never survive in direct combat. But they did not need to survive. They only needed to deliver one devastating strike. Each vessel carried nuclear-pumped missile pods, hundreds of missiles per ship. They had been waiting in silent running mode, hidden among the asteroids. Now they powered up and locked onto the compressed Krell formation. 6,000 missiles launched simultaneously from 30 human vessels. The Krell fleet, bunched together in their desperate charge, could not evade. Point defense systems tried to intercept, but there were simply too many targets. The missiles were guided by distributed artificial intelligence networks that coordinated their attacks for maximum effect. They identified weak points in shields and concentrated fire to exploit them. The explosions lit up space like a newborn star. Krell ships disappeared in blossoms of nuclear fire. Armor melted and hulls ruptured. Ships collided with each other as captains tried desperately to maneuver in the chaos. When the firestorm finally cleared, the Krell invasion fleet had effectively ceased to exist. 73 enemy ships destroyed outright. 41 more crippled and drifting. The survivors scattered in panic, jumping to faster-than-light travel without coordination or direction. The human fleet held position as the last Krell ships fled. Final casualties were tallied. 18 human vessels destroyed, 37 damaged but repairable. The Krell had lost over 200 ships out of 300. It was not just a victory. It was a massacre. The most feared raiders in known space had been broken by a species the galaxy had dismissed as primitive. On Viridian Prime, the Galactic Council chamber sat in absolute stunned silence. They had watched the entire battle on their long-range sensors. Every council member had seen human ships move with impossible speed and precision. They had seen human weapons tear through Krell defenses that had withstood council forces for generations. They had seen a tactical coordination that spoke of advanced command and control systems far beyond what intelligence had predicted. The implications were clear and terrifying. Humanity had not just defended itself. Humanity had revealed military capability that rivaled or exceeded that of the elder species. The Council had assumed human isolation would weaken them. Instead, it had allowed them to focus entirely on becoming a military power. And if what they had shown at Haven's Gate represented only part of their strength as Admiral Morrison had suggested, then the galaxy had seriously underestimated these newcomers. Ambassador Claire Bennett appeared via holographic link without asking for permission. She stood before the Council with the same calm dignity she had shown 6 months ago when she walked out. But now there was something else in her expression. Confidence. She informed the Council that humanity had successfully defended its territory. Human colonies were safe. Human people were secure. This had been achieved without Council assistance or oversight. Claire let that sink in before continuing. Humanity had withdrawn from peace talks because they were not offered peace. They were offered servitude. The Council had mistaken human desire for cooperation as weakness. They had assumed youth meant incompetence. They had confused diplomatic patience with military inadequacy. All of those assumptions had now been proven catastrophically wrong. The Velkari ambassador found his voice, though it lacked its usual arrogance. He asked what humanity wanted now. Claire's answer was simple. Humans wanted what they had asked for 6 months ago. Respect. Equal treatment in the galactic community. Fair trade and mutual defense based on partnership, not hierarchy. Cultural exchange between equals, not between masters and students. The Thros representative asked what would happen if the Council refused. It was a hollow question, and everyone knew it. Claire smiled for the first time. If the Council refused, then humanity would continue as it had been. Humans did not need the Galactic Council. But after today, perhaps the Council had realized that they might benefit from having humanity as an ally rather than merely as a neighbor. Admiral Morrison appeared beside Claire in the hologram, still wearing his combat uniform. He informed the Council that the fleet they had seen today represented 30% of current human military capability. Humanity had been building for 6 months and would continue building. The choice before the Council was simple. Did they want humans as partners, or just as neighbors who happened to have a very powerful fleet? The transmission ended, leaving the Council to face an uncomfortable truth. In their arrogance, they had rejected a species with extraordinary industrial capacity and innovative tactical thinking. They had assumed humanity would always need them. They had been wrong. Catastrophically, and completely wrong. 2 days later, the Galactic Council sent a formal request for renewed negotiations. The proposed terms included full Council membership with equal voting rights, mutual defense treaties, unrestricted colonization rights, technology sharing agreements. Everything that humanity had asked for originally and been denied. Ambassador Claire Bennett returned to Viridian Prime. This time she walked through corridors where alien diplomats nodded respectfully. Admiral Morrison accompanied her as a reminder that human diplomacy was now supported by undeniable military power. The new negotiations began with courtesy and mutual respect. The galaxy had learned a lesson written in fire across Haven's Gate. Humanity would never beg for recognition. They would never accept junior status. If you wanted humans as allies, you offered them partnership as equals. And if you made the mistake of making them enemies, you faced consequences that would reshape the balance of power across the stars.